Welcome to today's course on understanding VCs. As you set off on your respective founder journeys, you may consider at some point raising external funding from investors. It can often be a long and convoluted process that may leave you reconsidering why you even wanted to start a business in the first place. No worries though, I'm here to demystify the entire process, helping you manage your expectations and make your fundraising process a little bit less painful. Though, no matter what you learn today, just keep in mind that it'll still be hard work, so be prepared. My name is Jun. I'll be your instructor for this session. I've been an analyst at AppWorks for over 4 years, where I've been primarily in charge of sourcing deals all across Taiwan and Southeast Asia. Consequently, I've screened through over 1,000 companies now, equipping me with a few key insights, some learnings, and also some best practices that I'd like to share with you today. By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to absorb 3 key takeaways to help get you started on your fundraising process. The first, things you should know before you raise, and more importantly, why and when. The second, understanding how exactly the venture capital model works and what's typically going on through the mind of your average investor. And the third, how to go about choosing the right investor. You'll likely be on the startup journey for at least 5 to 10 years. So best pick the right companions. Now, the first and most fundamental question you want to ask yourself is, why do you want to raise money? And more specifically, do you even need to raise? Now, to help you answer that question, we're going to introduce another question. What kind of business are you running exactly? Now, although an oversimplification, in the VC world, investors see companies on a spectrum between scalable and non-scalable, with the former being more quote-unquote VC fundable, and the latter considered a more lifestyle business. Characteristics of a VC fundable or venture-backed company is one that's typically targeting large, addressable markets on a national, regional, or global scale, with high potential for growth. And in order to achieve that growth, they're likely building businesses that leverage underlying paradigm shifts in technology or consumer behavior. Ultimately, these businesses produce high risk and high rewards, making money for investors, founders, and all other shareholders involved, often through what they call liquidity events, such as M&A and IPO within a given time frame. Now, lifestyle businesses, on the other hand, tend to be less VC fundable and typically operate in traditional industries selling conventional products or services. They seldom use any form of leverage, that is human, capital, or technology, and consequently grow at a comfortably linear pace. These type of businesses probably don't have many external investors and thus have no pressure to exit within a given time frame and can be kept in private in perpetuity. Despite what headline-grabbing fundraising announcements might indicate, I'd like to stress that there is nothing wrong with building a non-VC fundable business over a venture-backed one. It really just depends on what type of lifestyle you want to maintain and what goals you're looking to accomplish with your business. And ultimately, how exactly you go about defining success. When it comes to venture capital, there are also many different types of investors. Aside from the typical institutional VC funds, there are also corporate investors who invest both off-balance sheet and through carved-out entities known as CVCs, or corporate venture capital funds. There are also family offices set up by high-net-worth individuals, and also accelerators like YC or 500 that take equity, or AppWorks that don't take equity but run a VC fund in parallel. And there are also angels who write checks at the pre-seed and idea stage. So before you meet with any VC, try to figure out what type of investor they are, as incentives, KPIs, and value add will all be different. But also know that before you tap into that VC well, there are always alternatives, including friends and family, bootstrapping from your own savings, crowdfunding via platforms like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, bank loans if you have the necessary collateral, though quite uncommon for startups, and increasingly tokens, which are geared more towards crypto startups and require a whole other sharing to properly explain. In summary, before you even think about raising, make sure you first ask yourself, what type of business you are building, and perhaps more importantly, what type of business and lifestyle you want. If you decide to go down the VC route, it's best to at least come with an MVP in hand. Certainly, there are many angels or some VC funds that play in the idea and pre-seed stage, but most will want to see some early market validation. You'll be better positioned, however, if you've reached product market fit, or PMF as they say, and are already demonstrating some initial indications of growth. The best time to raise is actually when you don't need money, which equips you with more leverage to negotiate better terms. The worst thing you can do as a founder is walk into the pitch meeting out of desperation. Okay, so you've decided that raising venture capital will be critical in achieving your ambitions and taking your company to the next level. Well, now it's important to understand how exactly the VC model works. In a very similar fashion to entrepreneurs, VC fund managers, often referred to as general partners, or GPs for short, have to go through the arduous process of fundraising as well. They're usually raising for financial institutions, corporates, and/or family offices, and then taking that capital and deploying it into startups to fund their growth and development. Any returns made from exits then flow back up the funnel. You may wonder how VCs actually make money for themselves. There are two primary ways. The first, management fees, which are usually on average 2 to 3% of the total AUM charged yearly. And second, carried interest, or carry for short, which is a cut that GPs take, typically 20 to 30%, after they return the fund's principal and cross a certain hurdle rate. I mentioned before that VC is a high-risk, high-reward business. The reason is that VCs are often deploying capital in very early-stage companies with untested business models. The rate of failure can be quite high, even after extensive due diligence. Let's say, for example, in a portfolio of 10 companies, 70% are likely to go to zero and perhaps even return 1x of the investment principal. And only 30% will return any meaningful sum, usually in the range of 10x, helping the fund to generate a profit on top of making up for all the other losses. You've heard of stories of VC funds making tons of money from companies like Coinbase or Netflix IPO. Well, for every IPO in a VC's portfolio, just know that there's likely a handful of other bets that did not pan out as expected. In terms of understanding the investor sitting across the table from you, know that the average VC will typically screen up to 1,000 pitches a year. Now, there's a good chance that they've seen 2 or 3 other companies doing exactly the same thing. So be sure to pinpoint what exactly it is that makes you special and what your unfair competitive advantage is, and then craft your narrative accordingly. Within a VC, the decision-making process is led by the deal team, which usually comprises of a partner and 1 or 2 junior members, likely analyst or associate. Some firms take a more bottoms-up approach for deal sourcing, enabling the junior members to have significant influence over the final investment outcome. Others will be more top-down driven, with partners primarily driving the due diligence process and ultimate decision-making. Try to recognize who calls the shots early on in your conversations to understand how to focus your time and effort. When meeting with an investor, understand that they are typically driven by dual fears. Fear of being left out of the next Google or Amazon, and the fear to be alone in a deal that no one else likes. In the early stages, however, we generally recommend that founders forget about these dynamics. You don't need to please everyone. Focus your efforts on finding that one investor who really gets what you're doing, believes in you, sees your vision, and will provide the necessary resources, support, and guidance to help you achieve it. The rest of the pieces will eventually fall in place as you and your startup matures. So, now that you understand how venture capital works and the mindset of a typical VC, let's talk about what you should look for in an investor. Finding and choosing an investor is actually very similar to dating. You need to take your time. Do as many meetings as you need to really grasp their worldview and gain comfort that they see eye to eye with your vision and will support you through thick and thin. After you've done your own due diligence and find that they check all the boxes, then you can seal the deal. Otherwise, a bad investor can truly make your startup life a living hell, especially when your business inevitably encounters a rough patch. Over the course of your founder journey, you'll likely get a bunch of inbound requests from investors wanting to meet you. There are usually several reasons why. The first, they're looking for companies to invest in. The second, they've developed an interest or thesis on a particular industry and are cataloging all the active players in the space. The third, they're looking at one of your competitors and want to benchmark performance, then bet on the horse with the most potential. The fourth, they're doing BD for one of their portfolio companies, whether it's in terms of partnerships or potential clients. The fifth is a junior member just knocking out their monthly KPIs. And lastly, is just for fun or serendipity. Now, you realize that only number one really provides you with any material value. The rest are generally a waste of your time. Unfortunately, it's quite hard sometimes to tell which angle an investor is approaching you from. That's why, generally, we recommend you put any investor conversations on hold until you've officially kicked off your fundraising process. Or if you'd like to warm up relationships pre-fundraise, keep them relatively short and focus on relationship building while withholding any sensitive information like key metrics which could potentially be used against you. When screening through potential investors, there are some basic filters that you can use to triage and prioritize meetings. Every fund will have certain preferences when it comes to their check size, industry, stage, and also geography. It's also important to note that a fund's vintage year, or the year in which it's established, to pinpoint where in the life cycle it is. In the investment period, typically the first 3 to 5 years, a fund will be actively deploying capital while setting aside a portion for follow-on investments, usually anywhere from 20 to 50% of the AUM. Those in the harvesting period, past year 5, will likely only be deploying follow-on capital into existing portfolios. It's also worth understanding a fund's composition of LPs or limited partners who may serve as potential investors or strategic partners downstream. Beyond that, there are many intangibles such as trust, values, reputation, chemistry, and communication styles that are worth investing time to fully grasp before putting any ink on paper. In addition to direct conversations, there are several channels that you can leverage to perform due diligence on a potential investor. The first place you should always check is the fund's website. This will typically list all the boilerplate details such as check size, stage, focus markets, number of portfolios, and also track record. On the website, you'll also typically find self-published content and thought leadership, which VCs leverage to get their name and views out there. LinkedIn is usually my next best bet, where I can do a little bit more research into the GPs and their backgrounds, as well as their connections. You can also do a bit of Googling and look into the firm's most recent news coverage to get a sense of their activity and investment pace, or any changes to their mandates. Another valuable source you should tap into are reference checks with the VC's existing portfolios. They serve as incredibly valuable benchmarks for how the firm approaches due diligence and investment decisions, and more importantly, how exactly they work with founders and add value. They can also shed light on how the investor behaves in times of duress, especially when investments don't turn out as planned. Lastly, we recommend that you ask around in your own network for general thoughts and impressions, which may serve as beneficial signals. Now, it's no secret, fundraising is hard. Every investor has different tastes and preferences when it comes to investment appetite, as well as due diligence timelines. To really prevent the feeling of juggling glass balls, it'll be important to adjust your pace. Each individual fundraise will entail countless meetings that will surely drain your energy if you don't pace yourself accordingly. It's best to leave at least 6 to 9 months for the process from start to finish. If you're kicking off initial discussions with only 3 months of runway left, you're going to be introducing a whole new world of stress onto yourself. Also, be prepared for an endless onslaught of no's and no responses. That, unfortunately, is just the nature of the game. Do keep in mind that you also have the right to say no too. It is a two-way street. We'd also like to emphasize that traction will always speak louder than words. So be sure to focus on the fundamentals of your business and understand your customers inside and out. Now, for any fundraise, focus on securing the lead or the investor who is willing to issue a term sheet first, and then the rest of the dominoes will fall in place after. And that's it. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two about fundraising and how exactly it works, as well as how investors think. Now, at the end of the day, the secret to successfully raising money is to have a great story built on a solid foundation. It's also important to keep in mind that fundraising, while often a long and complicated process, should not be a milestone that you should necessarily optimize for. Focus on solving a problem and only raise money if it helps you create more value for your customers. Good luck on your startup journey. Happy building.